Ludicolo is a Mexican-themed Pokemon. He's intended to resemble a typical Mexican person. Traditionally, Ludicolo supposedly has a poncho and a sombrero that helps him fit in with the Mexican stereotype that he is intended to represent. One can clearly see the representation of a sombrero on the top of his head. Not only does it just look like a typical hat, but if you look at the design of his hat, you can also tell that it follows a similar pattern to other Mexican sombreros, as well as the palm tree type of thing jutting out of his sombrero that's meant to represent the top of the hat. Very easy to tell it's a sombrero. Now, a lot of people say that the intended purpose of the furry part in the midsection of Ludicolo is intended to represent a poncho. That is not what I am disagreeing with. I am not disagreeing that the middle part of Ludicolo is intended to represent a poncho. What I am saying is that poncho representation is absolutely fucking horrible. The midsection looks absolutely nothing like a poncho in the same way that his hat actually looks like a sombrero. I will now direct your attention to both Ludicolo's midsection, the furry midsection that is intended to represent the poncho, and a picture of a generic poncho on the other side of your screen. The first thing we notice is the poncho is very loose and flowy. Now this actually does match up with Ludicolo's fur. It's fluffy and flowy, and at this point, we could probably say it does look kind of poncho-y. But if you look at the details of how a poncho actually looks, you'll realize that if you think this is a good representation of a poncho, you are absolutely fucking acoustic. If you direct your attention to the neckline of the poncho, you'll notice that it's actually kind of in a V shape, whereas the top opening part of Ludicolo's furry midsection area extends all the way above his eyes, his nose, and into the upper part of his sombrero, almost as if it were supposed to be some sort of a hoodie thing. Next, if you look at the sleeve parts of a poncho, you'll notice that they fully extend over the shoulders and sometimes even as far as just above the elbow. However, if you look at the furry midsection of a Ludicolo, you will notice that the Ludicolo's furry midsection does not have anything that remotely resembles sleeves, which is an extremely important part of a poncho, which I assume is meant to protect Mexican people from the hot sun beating down on them all day, much like the sombrero is. Not only would this supposed poncho be absolutely ineffective and useless for a poncho's actual intended purpose, but my last point, there are rarely any ponchos that have this kind of design. There are rarely any actual ponchos that are actually designed like this in this diagonal zigzag pattern. Many ponchos feature many colors and lines and are very bright patterns. However, this Ludicolo's quote-unquote poncho is very bland in its design. If you think that this supposed poncho on the Ludicolo's design is any sort of accurate representation of a real poncho, and that somebody would be able to actually look at it and say, oh yeah, that's a representation for a poncho. Yeah, that Pokemon's supposed to be a Mexican thing. It's supposed to look like a Mexican person, which I'm not even gonna get into that. That's kind of free. It can very well be a representation for a poncho. And yes, that would match with a sombrero. And I believe that it is supposed to be a representation for a poncho. My only point is it doesn't fucking look like one. And if you keep insisting that this thing looks like a fucking poncho, you are 100% wrong and you need to seriously fucking reevaluate